The woman was already crying before the surprise guest walked out. That was the part nobody understood later, when the clip went viral, when 340 million people watched it and argued about what had happened and why. Yolanda Reeves was crying before she knew. She was standing at the Family Feud podium, both hands gripping the metal edge, tears running down her face in two clean lines, because Steve Harvey had just told her that her score of 176 on Fast Money was not enough, that she had fallen 24 points short of $20,000, and that the game was over. She nodded. She said, "Okay." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and she turned to her family, her sister Charlene, her niece Destiny, her Aunt Lorraine, and her 16-year-old son Marcus, who was standing at the end of the line in a suit jacket 2 sizes too big. And she smiled. She smiled at them. She smiled the way women smile when they have decided that their children will never see them break. And the smile was so practiced, so structurally perfect, so absolutely devastating in its falseness, that Steve Harvey took one step backward, pressed his hand against his chest, and said to his producers, off mic, but picked up by 3 boom microphones, "Get Dr. Williams out here. Get him out here right now." Yolanda didn't know who Dr. Williams was. She didn't know that a man had been waiting backstage for 45 minutes. She didn't know that the producers had spent 11 days arranging what was about to happen. And when the curtain at the back of the stage parted and a man in a white coat walked out carrying a manila folder, Yolanda Reeves, a dialysis patient, a night shift hotel housekeeper, a single mother who had been on a kidney transplant waiting list for 4 years and 7 months, looked at him, and her knees locked, and her smile vanished, and she said, "No," not as a refusal, as a prayer. "No! No, no, no!" And the studio fell completely silent. It was February 18th, 2024, a Sunday, Atlanta, the kind of gray winter afternoon where the sky sits low enough to press on your shoulders. The Reeves family had arrived at Studio 17 at 6:20 a.m. in a borrowed Chevrolet Suburban that belonged to their church's associate pastor, a man named Deacon Price, who had driven them 9 hours from Greenville, South Carolina, and waited in the parking lot the entire day, reading scripture on his phone, because he said he'd promised Yolanda's late mother he would never leave her children stranded anywhere. Their opponents were the Nakamura family from Honolulu, Hawaii, a family of surfers and teachers led by their mother June, a 58-year-old high school guidance counselor who introduced herself to Steve by saying, "I've been guiding children for 30 years, Steve, but today I'm just here to win money and embarrass my sons." The audience loved her. Steve loved her. Everybody loved June Nakamura. 2 families, 1 stage, a man in a white coat waiting behind a curtain. But the real story hadn't even started yet. Yolanda Reeves had been a housekeeper at the Greenville Marriott for 19 years. She started the week after her 20th birthday, 2005, the same month Marcus was born, the same month his father, a long-haul trucker named Curtis, left for a run to El Paso and never came back. Not dead, just gone, the way some men go, gradually and then completely. The phone calls shrinking from daily to weekly to monthly, to a voicemail box that was full, and then a number that was disconnected, and then nothing. A silence that Marcus grew up inside of like a room with no windows. Yolanda worked the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., because the night differential paid $2.15 more per hour, and $2.15 multiplied by 8 hours multiplied by 5 nights, multiplied by 52 weeks, was $4,472 a year. And $4,472 was the difference between keeping the heat on and choosing between heat and groceries. She had done that math on a napkin at the hotel's front desk during her first week. And she had never stopped doing it, running numbers constantly, unconsciously, the way other people hum songs. The kidneys started failing in 2019. Focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a name so long that Yolanda wrote it on an index card and carried it in her wallet so she could say it correctly at appointments. The nephrologist at Prisma Health explained it carefully. Her kidneys were scarring, the filters were closing, her body was slowly losing the ability to clean itself. Stage 3 in 2019. Stage 4 by early 2020. Dialysis began in August 2020. 3 times a week, 4 hours per session, at a clinic 14 minutes from the apartment. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. She went before her shifts. She sat in a reclining chair with 2 needles in her left arm and watched her blood leave her body, pass through a machine, and come back. She did this 624 times over the next 4 years. She counted. She kept a tally on the inside cover of her Bible, small pencil marks, 4 vertical lines and a diagonal slash, the way prisoners count days. She never missed a shift at the Marriott. Not once. She would finish dialysis at 9 p.m., drive home, change into her uniform, black pants, white polo, name tag that said Yolanda in block letters, and clock in at 11. She cleaned 14 rooms per shift. She vacuumed and stripped beds and scrubbed bathtubs while her arm throbbed from the needles and her legs swelled from the fluid retention and her body begged her to stop. And she did not stop, because Marcus needed braces, and Marcus needed new shoes for basketball season, and Marcus needed a graphing calculator for AP Math that cost $119, and $119 was 28 rooms, 2 shifts, and she did the napkin math, and she went to work. She lied to Marcus. She told him the dialysis appointments were physical therapy for a back injury. She told him the bruises on her arm were from bumping into housekeeping carts. She told him she worked nights because she preferred the quiet, not because the differential was keeping them housed. She built the lie the way she made beds, with hospital corners, tight and smooth, no wrinkles showing. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. Marcus found out on his own. He was 15 when he discovered a dialysis bill on the kitchen table. $2,400, stamped past due, shoved under a stack of coupons his mother had been cutting. He didn't confront her. He did something quieter, something more devastating in its patience. He went to the school library and spent 3 hours reading about kidney disease. He learned what dialysis was. He learned what a transplant list was. He learned that the average wait time for a kidney in South Carolina was 5 to 7 years, and that people died on the list. He walked home from school that afternoon, 40 minutes, because the bus had already left and he didn't have money for a fare, and when he got home, he cooked dinner. Rice and canned beans. He set the table for 2. When Yolanda came out of her bedroom, dressed for dialysis, Marcus was sitting at the table with 2 plates, and he said nothing about what he'd found. He just said, "I made food, Mama. Eat before you go." Yolanda sat down. She looked at the rice and beans. She looked at her son. She understood in the way that mothers understand that the meal was not a meal. It was a confession. It was Marcus saying, "I know," without forcing her to say, "I've been lying." They ate in silence. When Yolanda left for the clinic, Marcus washed both plates, dried them, put them away, and sat in the living room in the dark until she came home at 9:15, and he pretended to be asleep on the couch, and she covered him with a blanket, and neither of them mentioned it. Not that night, not ever. Because some truths are too large to hold in words, so you hold them in rice and beans and clean plates and blankets laid carefully over sleeping children. He started working. A grocery store, After school, $9 an hour, bagging and stocking. He gave Yolanda $100 a week and told her it was for his own phone bill. But Yolanda didn't have a phone plan for him. He used the school's Wi-Fi and a prepaid flip phone that cost $15 a month. And she knew, and he knew she knew, and the lie lived between them like a piece of furniture they both walked around without acknowledging. He typed his blood. He went to the school nurse and asked how to find out his blood type. The nurse pricked his finger and told him, O positive, universal donor, compatible with his mother's A positive. He was 15 years old, and he was already doing the math. Not the napkin math, but the other kind, the kind where you calculate what you're willing to give away. Steve would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. The Reeves family played well, but not perfectly. They won 2 rounds and lost 1. Charlene, Yolanda's sister, gave an answer in round 3. Name something that keeps you up at night. That landed like a stone. She said, worrying about somebody you can't help. It was the number 2 answer. Steve looked at her for a long time and said, that's more than an answer, that's a testimony. The Nakamura family was good. June's sons were fast on the buzzer, and June herself had an instinct for the survey that felt almost clinical. The game was close. The Reeves family pulled ahead in round 4, and fast money fell to Yolanda and Marcus. Marcus went first. He stepped to the podium in his oversized suit jacket, the one Yolanda had bought at Goodwill the week before the taping and hadn't been able to afford to get tailored. He scored 136. Decent, not dominant. Then Yolanda stepped up. She was tired. She had done dialysis the previous morning, driven 9 hours in the Suburban, slept 3 hours in a motel room Deacon Price had paid for, and arrived at the studio with her arm still bruised from the needles. She answered all 5 questions. The board counted. 40 points. 176. 24 points short. The studio fell completely silent. Yolanda looked at the number. She closed her eyes. She opened them. And she turned around and gave her family that smile, the structural smile, the smile that said, I am fine, to every person on earth except the one person who knew she wasn't. And that person was standing 6 feet away in a suit jacket 2 sizes too big, with his jaw clenched so tight that the muscles in his neck were visible from the 3rd row. Steve took 1 step backward. His hand went to his chest, and he said the words that Linda Chow, the same producer who had sprinted barefoot during the Okafor taping, heard through her earpiece. Get Dr. Williams out here. Get him out here right now. The curtain at the back of the stage parted. Dr. Raymond Williams walked out. He was tall, calm, carrying a manila folder, wearing a white coat with MUSC Health embroidered on the pocket. The Medical University of South Carolina, one of the top transplant centers in the Southeast. He walked to center stage and stood beside Steve, and Yolanda looked at him, and her smile collapsed. No, she said. No, no, no. Yolanda, Steve said. His voice was barely controlled. This is Dr. Williams. He's been waiting backstage for 45 minutes. The producers called him 11 days ago, and he drove up from Charleston this morning because he has something to tell you. Dr. Williams opened the folder. Mrs. Reeves, he said, your name has been on the transplant list for 4 years and 7 months. I am here to tell you that we have a match. A living donor. Compatible. Tested. Cleared. He paused. The surgery is scheduled for March 15th if you accept. Yolanda's knees buckled. Charlene caught her from one side, Lorraine from the other. Marcus didn't move. He was standing at the end of the podium, perfectly still, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable. The audience was on its feet, screaming, crying, but Marcus was silent, and Steve noticed. Steve noticed because he had been watching Marcus the entire game. The oversized jacket, the clenched jaw, the way the boy held himself like a man carrying something he wasn't old enough to carry. "Marcus," Steve said. Marcus looked at him. "You know who the donor is, don't you?" The studio fell completely silent. Marcus's chin trembled. For the first time all day, the structure broke. His eyes filled. He pressed his lips together. He looked at his mother, and he said, "It's me, Mama. I'm the match. I've been getting tested for 8 months." Yolanda's legs gave out completely. Charlene and Lorraine couldn't hold her. She went to the floor. Not a collapse, a descent, controlled and total. A woman lowering herself to her knees on a stage floor in front of 200 people, because standing was no longer possible when your 16-year-old son has just told you that he has been secretly preparing to give you a piece of his body. "Marcus," she whispered, "Marcus, you can't. Baby, you're 16, you can't." "I can," Marcus said. His voice was steady now. The trembling had passed. "I typed my blood at school. I went to Dr. Williams on my own. I took the bus to Charleston 3 times. Miss Charlene drove me twice. I didn't tell you because you would have said no, and I wasn't going to let you say no." He looked at Steve. "She's been going to that clinic 624 times. I counted the marks in her Bible. I wasn't going to let her go 625. The studio fell completely silent for the 3rd time. Steve Harvey's face was wet. He was not wiping his eyes. He was not trying to hide it. He was standing on the Family Feud stage with tears running openly down his face. And the camera operators, every single one of them, were crying too. And a sound technician later told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that the studio was so quiet between Marcus's words and Steve's response that he could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents 3 stories above. "Stop the tape," Steve said. His voice cracked on the second word. "Stop everything." But Steve wasn't done. He walked to Marcus. He stood in front of a 16-year-old boy in an oversized Goodwill suit jacket, and he said, "Let me tell you something. When I was at my lowest, when I was living in my car, showering at gas stations, eating whatever I could find, an old man at a gas station said something to me. He said, 'God's got a plan bigger than your pain.' I held on to that sentence for 30 years. 30 years. And I thought I understood it. But I didn't understand it until right now. Because the plan wasn't about me. The plan was about what happens when someone loves another person so much that they start giving away pieces of themselves before they're even old enough to vote." He put both hands on Marcus's shoulders. "You are 16 years old, and you are the most selfless human being I have ever met on this stage. And I have met thousands." He pulled out his phone. "Mama Reeves," he said, not looking at Yolanda, keeping his eyes on Marcus. "Your son did this by himself, on a bus, at 16. So I'm going to do something by myself, right now." He called Dwayne Johnson. "D," Steve said, "I need you. I've got a 16-year-old boy standing in front of me who has been secretly getting tested to donate a kidney to his mother. His mother has been on dialysis 624 times. He counted. He counted every single one. And he decided, at 16, that 624 was enough." He put the phone on speaker. The studio listened. Dwayne Johnson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What's his name?" "Marcus." "Marcus, brother. I grew up watching my mother struggle. I watched her lose everything. And I was too young to fix it. You weren't too young. You fixed it. And I want to make sure that when you come out of that surgery, you and your mom come home to a life that doesn't break you anymore." Dwayne Johnson pledged $100,000, enough to cover the surgery copays, 6 months of mortgage on a new home, and the establishment of a college fund for Marcus. He pledged a second $100,000 to the dialysis clinic where Yolanda had sat in a reclining chair 624 times to subsidize treatment for uninsured patients. The audience erupted. Lorraine was on her knees, praying. Charlene was holding Destiny, who was sobbing. Deacon Price, who had been watching from the back of the studio, where he'd finally come inside after 9 hours in the parking lot, was standing with his Bible pressed against his chest, his lips moving. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to camera one. Everyone watching at home. A 16-year-old boy took a bus to Charleston by himself, 3 times, to get tested to save his mother's life. He didn't tell her. He didn't ask permission. He counted the marks in her Bible, and he decided that 624 was enough. If you are a parent watching this, if you think your children don't see you, hear me. They see everything. They count the marks. They make the rice and beans. They wash the plates. They sit in the dark. They know. And they are already figuring out how to save you. June Nakamura was already on her feet. She had crossed the stage before Steve finished speaking. She was crying. The guidance counselor who had spent 30 years guiding children was watching a 16-year-old boy guide his own mother off a transplant list, and her professional composure was gone. She walked to Marcus, and she cupped his face in both hands, a gesture she had done 10,000 times in her office in Honolulu, holding the faces of teenagers who didn't know their own worth. And she said, "You are the young man I spend my whole career hoping to find. And I found you on a game show." Steve awarded the Nakamura family a return appearance and $15,000 from the show's discretionary fund. June's sons hugged Marcus one by one. Her youngest, Kai, who was 19 and pre-med at the University of Hawaii, pressed a folded note into Marcus's hand. Marcus opened it later in the Suburban on the drive home. It said, "I'm going into transplant surgery because of you. That's not a joke. I applied yesterday." The studio fell completely silent one final time. Then Yolanda, still on the floor, reached up and took Marcus's hand. He helped her stand. She was shaking. She looked at her son, at the Goodwill jacket, the clenched jaw, the boy who had cooked rice and beans and washed the plates and counted the marks in her Bible, and she said, "I told you the dialysis was physical therapy." Marcus almost smiled. "I know, Mama." "And you went and got tested anyway?" "Yes, ma'am." "Without telling me?" "Without telling you." Marcus Reeves. She held his face the way June Nakamura had, the way mothers hold the faces of children who have become too large to carry, but never too large to hold. "I have been lying to you for 4 years." "I know." "And you've been lying to me for 8 months." "I know." "We're done lying." "Yes, ma'am, we're done." Steve Harvey turned away. He pressed his hand over his eyes, and he stood like that for 12 seconds, his back to the cameras, his shoulders rising and falling. A grip operator later said it was the only time in 24 years that the entire crew, every person in the building, had stopped working and stood in silence. Not because someone told them to, but because there was nothing else to do. The episode aired March 10, 2024, 5 days before the scheduled surgery. The clip reached 340 million views in 4 days. The hashtag 624 trended in 29 countries. Medical schools used the clip in ethics courses about minor donors. The American Society of Nephrology cited Marcus Reeves in a white paper on living donation advocacy. The number 624, the tally in the Bible, became a symbol. People posted their own numbers, chemotherapy sessions, AA meetings, school lunches packed, nights slept on hospital floors. The message was always the same: Someone was counting, and someone saw. The surgery took place on March 15, 2024, at MUSC Health in Charleston. Dr. Williams performed the transplant. The procedure lasted 5 hours and 12 minutes. Marcus was released after 4 days. Yolanda was released after 6. Her new kidney, her son's kidney, began functioning within hours of transplant, producing urine on the operating table, a biological event that Dr. Williams later called as close to perfect as transplant medicine gets. Yolanda returned to the Marriott in April. She worked day shifts now, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., because she no longer needed the night differential. The $2.15 per hour that had once been the difference between heat and hunger was no longer necessary, and the napkin math she had run for 19 years finally produced a number she didn't have to solve for. She was making enough. She was, for the first time since 2005, simply making enough. Marcus finished his junior year with a 3.8 GPA. He applied to the University of South Carolina's pre-med program. His application essay was 1 paragraph long. It said, "My mother sat in a chair 624 times and let a machine clean her blood so she could clean hotel rooms so I could go to school. I am going to become a doctor so that no mother has to sit in that chair 624 times. I have already given 1 kidney. I have more to give." The 624 Foundation was established in June 2024, funded by viral proceeds, Dwayne Johnson's matching pledge, and donations from 140,000 individuals across 31 countries. It focused on 2 things: subsidizing dialysis costs for uninsured patients, and creating a mentorship program that paired teenagers with chronically ill parents, giving them medical information, emotional support, and, critically, a safe place to say out loud what Marcus had carried in silence for over a year. "I know my parent is sick, and I want to help, and I don't know how." In its first 10 months, the foundation served 5,100 families and facilitated 214 living donor evaluations. Deacon Price drove them home from Charleston after the surgery. The same Suburban, the same 9-hour route. But this time, Yolanda was in the back seat with Marcus, and she was asleep. Genuinely asleep. Not the performative sleep of a woman hiding pain, but the deep, surrendered sleep of a body that was, for the first time in 4 years, cleaning itself. Marcus was awake. He watched her sleep. He didn't close his eyes until they crossed the South Carolina state line, and when he did, Charlene looked in the rearview mirror and saw a mother and son sleeping in the back seat of a borrowed car, leaning against each other, breathing in the same rhythm. And she pulled over and sat on the shoulder of I-85 for 5 minutes because she couldn't see the road. Steve Harvey said, in a later interview with GQ, "I've done this show for a long time. I've made people laugh, and I've made people cry, and I've given away money and cars and vacations. But I have never, not once, watched a 16-year-old boy look his mother in the eye and say, 'I counted.' That's not television. That's not a moment. That's a mirror." He held up a mirror to every person in that room and showed them what love actually costs. It costs counting. It costs paying attention. It costs a bus ticket to Charleston and a blood test and 8 months of silence. And that boy paid every cent of it without being asked. In the apartment in Greenville, they're saving for a house, but the apartment is enough for now, there is a Bible on the nightstand, Yolanda's Bible. Inside the front cover, there are 624 pencil marks, 4 vertical lines and a diagonal, grouped in clusters of 5, the record of every dialysis session she endured between August 2020 and March 2024. She hasn't added to the tally. She won't add to it again. But she hasn't erased it, because the marks aren't a record of suffering. They're a record of presence. 624 times she sat in a chair and let a machine do what her body couldn't, so she could go home and be Marcus's mother. And Marcus saw every mark. He counted every one. And when he reached 624, he gave her something no machine could, a piece of himself, warm and alive and already working. A kidney that knew whose body it came from and whose body it was going to, and didn't see a difference. There is a kind of love that does not speak. It cooks rice and beans. It washes plates. It rides a bus to Charleston 3 times without telling anyone. It sits in a reclining chair with 2 needles in its arm 624 times and gets up every time and goes to work. It counts. It always counts. And when the number gets high enough, it walks onto a stage and says, "Enough." That is not sacrifice. That is what happens when 2 people love each other so completely that their bodies stop knowing where one ends and the other begins. Marcus Reeves gave his mother a kidney, but Yolanda Reeves had been giving him everything else for 16 years. The math, in the end, was even. If you're still here, this one is inside you now. Send it to the person you've been counting for, or the person who's been counting for you. Subscribe and hit the bell, because every week this channel finds the love the world almost missed and makes sure it echoes until everybody hears.